Unanswered questions about Jason Voorhees.
It's a sad day for the horror community. You probably know by now, but we have the sad news that Laura Park Lincoln has passed away. I've had the privilege to meet her at Scarefest a few times. Sweet woman. This is certainly a sad loss for the community. But ladies and gentlemen, let's not mourn her death, let's celebrate her life. For Laura is forever immortalized as Tina Shepard, the final girl that can whoop Jason's ass without being hands-on. So this video is dedicated to her. With that being said, to Tina, to Laura.
Number 1.
Was Jason's grave destroyed? I found yet another blink and you miss a moment during the recaps of the flashback scenes. This interests me quite a bit because you never see this in Jason Lives. The grave never gets destroyed. So that means they went back and shot this at Eternal Peace Cemetery.
A death curse. They say he died as a boy. Few have seen him.
Now, if we aren't breaking the fourth wall, and I know I say that a lot, but you would be amazed at the comments I get.
Pay attention to me!
That means Jason's grave was destroyed by lightning prior to the events of this film. So lightning struck in the same place twice. It's easy to miss because directly after they show Jason's grave get exploded by lightning, they mix it in with the lightning scenes from Jason Lives during Jason's resurrection. So I guess that means that poor Hawes is still down there. That man's heart must be broken or punched out. This short little scene amazes me because I consider it great cinematography. So much so it really doesn't match the rest of this film. But going back into the fourth wall, when was Jason's grave destroyed?
Number 2.
And
Number 3.
you guys ready for this one? This is a big one. This is a two-part question, a hot take. Question number 1. The first question, does this take place at the Jarvis residence? And the other question, why doesn't Jason attack Tina after he emerges from the lake? Now these fit in together, so we'll talk about this front to back. So the first half, does this take place at the Jarvis residence? I've argued about this for years, but now it's time we finally clear this up. I know we're not supposed to break the fourth wall of the film, and I'm not really, but I'm going to show you some metadata here. If you look closely at the scene right here when Jason approaches his cabin, in the New Blood, the exterior shots, yeah, that's the Jarvis residence from the final chapter. You can see the woodwork, the windows, the trim, all of it matches up. It doesn't take a genius to figure this out. Some more metadata here. In real life, they actually used the Jarvis residence for some reshoots up in California. And people still argue with me that this isn't the Jarvis residence.
Bullshit!
I digress. Let's move on. Now check out this scene. Robin walking to the hallway into Tommy's old bedroom. Look at this photo comparison. Look at that room. That's Tommy Jarvis's old bedroom. Same layout, same angles, same window. Then when Jason throws her out the window is when they again use that exterior shot of the Jarvis residence. And if that's not enough, take a look when Maddie heads outside. She's walking out of the basement of the Jarvis residence. Same foundation, same entry point. Look at these photos for comparison. You see that fencing right there? Do you see that tree? There's no denying it. This is the Jarvis residence. So that means in the movie's universe, this has to be walking distance from the Shepard residence and Russell's uncle's cabin that they used for the birthday party. Now that we have that locked in, here comes the question we've all been waiting for, which ties in perfectly with the first half. Why doesn't Jason attack Tina when he's resurrected? The simple answer, because he's not there. Hear me out. Jason is not at the Shepard residence when he rises up from the lake. Let's look at the clip to break this down. Watch the shot closely, and I mean really look at it. Tina should be about 10 to 15 feet away from Jason, right? But if you look in front of him, there's no dock, there's no houses, there's no Tina. Behind him, pitch black woods. You can basically see a 360 around Jason. And when Jason walks up the shore, what do you see? Just plain woods. So what does that tell us? That tells us that Tina didn't bring Jason up in front of her, in front of the Shepard residence. She had a real-time premonition, one of her psychic flashes. She saw it happening as it happened, just from miles away. I'll talk about more examples of this later in the video. And this lines up perfectly with her powers that we talk about later in the video as well. Because we know she has premonitions of the future, but she can also have hallucinations in present. And she also has hallucinations of the past. We'll get to that in a minute. So she felt it and saw it the moment Jason returned, but it wasn't in front of her. And this also ties into another major disbelief people have about the film. People think Jason wakes up, overlooks Tina, and goes miles out of his way to go kill Michael and Jane when the car breaks down. But that's actually backwards. He's not walking away from Tina to get them. He's walking towards her.
It's gonna be a great birthday.
Jane and Michael were just in his path. He felt her presence and headed toward her residence and then started the massacre.
I can only count to 4.
Who is Russell's uncle that owns the cabin?
They're eating my uncle's food. He's gonna shit.
This question matters a lot more than you think. To some, Russell mentioning his uncle's cabin might just be a throwaway line. I disagree, because it quietly opens up a bigger door about the layout of Camp Crystal Lake. Because up until now, we was mostly led to believe Camp Crystal Lake was just the old campgrounds that turned into Camp Forest Green. But if people like Russell's uncle still owns private land and private cabins out here, it shows that Camp Crystal Lake is a lot bigger than just a summer camp. There's real estate, private homes, a whole shoreline that belongs to the family. We can see a little bit of this in part 8 too, if you consider that canon. A lot of people don't. The great thing about the Shepherd residence is that we can actually use it as a tool to maybe close the distant gaps between places like Higgins Haven, Packanack, the Jarvis residence. Get a closer insight to Pinehurst, because again, his uncle's cabin and the Shepherd residence clearly is not new. Even in the flashback scenes, you may think the filmmakers adding another location to Camp Crystal Lake might convolute things. I actually think it does the opposite. If we have all these gaps anyway, if you fill in one, it's kind of like putting a piece of the puzzle together. So at this point, it's no longer just a Camp Crystal Lake campground that's isolated out in the middle of nowhere. What used to be Camp Forest Green, we now realize it's vacation homes, a breathing community that's been decaying around the tragedies, a place where family stays, properties change hands, and they stubbornly try to move on from the death curse. And that kind of makes Jason's story a little bit more interesting as well, because we already knew that Jason's story isn't locked behind the fence of Camp Crystal Lake. It expands way beyond. And that stays true to the Shepherd residence and Russell's uncle's cabin. So what do you think, chat? Who was Russell's uncle that owned that cabin? Ooh, baby, ooh, baby. Was John ever even there? This is a hot take, but hear me out. Honestly, I don't think so. If you really look at it, the whole idea of Tina's dad, John, coming back at the end of the movie feels more like a psychic delusion. One last emotional outburst, rather than a real resurrection. Her hero comes back to save her. Because think about it, Tina's powers has been emotionally triggered throughout the movie. That's kind of the entire motive. The idea of her hallucinating about her father is throughout the whole movie.
Sorry, Daddy. I wish I could bring you back.
Tina, you're creating images of your father
Why am I seeing things?
from the guilt that you have about your father's death.
Mama, I miss him so much.
Don't run away from it. Your guilt over your father's death it's a powerful thing.
What's happening to me?
But what if Dr. Cruz was actually right? This would explain the lack of decomposition that John should have, instead of the supposed to be very rotted corpse that John Shepherd should be. And that's if John was down there at all. Because truthfully, we don't know if his body was recovered or not. I would imagine it was, because again, this is not the location at the ending of Jason Lives. We have established that. And the movie leads you to believe that Tina hasn't been back there since the tragedy has happened. She's been inside the hospital. She's been at the institution the whole time. So this is actually her first time back there since that happened. So what she sees is rather her interpretation, a memory version of her father John, still intact after he fell into the lake those many years ago. Also, jumping ahead a little bit, this lines up perfectly when you look at Part 8's opening. I know some don't consider 8, 9, and 10 canon, and for the most part, I don't either, to a degree. Given this theory is true, look at this, it makes perfect sense. Tina actually collapses the pier, not John, and changed Jason down where he sits until Part 8. Look at this clip here. This actually has some consistency, minus the new Camp Crystal Lake. But we'll talk about that in Part 8. So when you really look at it, I don't think John Shepherd ever came back. Tina did it all. She used the very last of her ammunition, the last bit of her grief, her fear, her anger, her guilt, her rage, to tear that dog apart and bury Jason herself. Whether she realized it or not, I think her mind just made it easier by painting her father as the hero. And that kind of ties everything together more than people realize. So Jason didn't get dragged down by a ghost. He got crushed by Tina Shepherd. And he stayed down there chained, beaten, until the next person comes and pisses him off. So what do you think, guys? Was John ever even there?
Number 6.
And number 7. Two-part question here. What exactly is Tina? And where do her powers originate from? Do they originate from Camp Crystal Lake? Let's talk about this front to back. Tina is often labeled as a carbon copy of Carrie, but I can assure you that's not the case. She does show some extraordinary powers of telekinesis, being able to move things with your mind. Get my nachos. Bring me the toilet paper. Now this is the main power she showcases during the movie, especially her battle with Jason, and during her trials with Dr. Cruz. But that's not all.
But wait! There's more!
Let's talk about her precognitive abilities. Being able to see events of the future, premonitions, as she hallucinates the other victim's death in the film. But this power is even greater than you might think, because not only can she see the future, she can see the past. A prime example is Nick's cousin Michael. Here is the actual death. And here is her hallucination. Almost like she's tapping into the event itself, not the memory, but something like a psychic echo. I don't think there's a good term to encapsulate all the powers she has combined, other than being a demigod. And if that's not enough, let's talk about the other obvious plot point and her other power. Her ability to revive the dead, such as Jason and her father. Carbon copy paste of Carrie? Nah, Tina will mop the floor with Carrie's ass and use her prom dress to dry it up. Now to the second part of this question. Where do her powers originate from? Do they originate from Camp Crystal Lake? Sounds crazy, but hear me out. One thing I can attest to is that Camp Crystal Lake is anything but normal. There's been supernatural activity in this franchise for a while. This isn't nothing new. Jason's very existence proves that. His multiple resurrections. But this movie really does take the cake on the supernatural elements. I don't think Tina was born with just powers. I think she was shaped by the darkness, the dark energy of Camp Crystal Lake. The opening scene, we see Tina as a little girl moments before John's tragedy. We can see the Shepherd residence clearly isn't new, and we've already established that this location is not the same location at the end of Jason Lives. It's not the same location on the shoreline. My theory is that somehow Tina was born and became the product or a medium of the supernatural elements that reside at Camp Crystal Lake. This isn't a normal camp. This isn't a regular body of water. Think about it. Jason's first death, Pamela's murder spree, the multiple rampages by Jason, Tommy Jarvis's battle with Jason, years of tragedy, death, fear, all soaked into the ground and into the lake like blood into the soul. I don't think it's coincidence that Tina becomes another mystery of the camp. How else can you explain her godlike powers? As I said it before, her powers go beyond telekinesis. She can resurrect the dead. She can see the past, the present, the future. So Camp Crystal Lake, I think it inadvertently kind of weaponized her. She was exposed to that supernatural radiation that stemmed from the lake. Psychic pollution. Call it whatever you want. But Tina's powers, I do think Camp Crystal Lake was the conduit.
Number 8.
Jason got headbutted. Get it? Because the head was in the plant and the head hit Jason and got headbutted. What was Dr. Cruz's true intentions? I do believe Dr. Cruz is one of the wildest villains in the franchise. He does some shit in this movie that makes Jason go, damn. Like sacrificing Tina's mother. I was like, damn, man. Now we know movie-wise, he wanted to emotionally trigger Tina at Camp Crystal Lake so that she could perform for him. You know what I'm saying? But my question is why? Is it really fame or fortune? Did he want to weaponize her? We know he never really had any interest in actually helping Tina. She was basically his experiment, not patient. Now, a lot of times in these videos when I break them down, I point out blink and you miss it moments. This is one of the times it's actually reverse. So I'm wondering about the newspaper clippings that Tina finds in Dr. Cruz's desk. Now, this is one of the few times we actually don't get a lot of information from the newspaper clippings. That makes me wonder how much Dr. Cruz knew about Jason and the camp's lore. Because if you watch my last video, I personally believe that Tommy took the fall for the massacre in part 6 at Camp Forest Green. Jason didn't take the fall because his body was still down there years and years later. And we now know that after the events of Jason Lives, in the events of this movie, Jason's tombstone at the gravesite gets destroyed. So poor Alan is still down there. So I don't think Dr. Cruz thinks Jason is responsible. Killer at Crystal Lake body never recovered? If I had to guess, that would be part 4 when he escaped the morgue. Therefore, his body was never actually recovered because it was missing. That's the only thing I can think of. So how much lore did he actually know about Jason Voorhees? Does that have anything to do with the bigger picture? You know, honestly, I don't really think so. I don't think Cruz thought Jason was still out there roaming around and that they would have this big face-off. Because what does Dr. Cruz benefit from that? Nothing. That also makes me wonder about the fame and fortune stuff. Wouldn't he already have his name established? Think about it. In this universe, if there was a teenage girl who could move shit with her mind, and he's already her doctor at the Institute has to know about this. It's gonna make headlines. People are gonna chatter. Her story's gonna be everywhere. Everybody should already know about this. I mean, she's been showcasing these powers since she was a little girl. This isn't nothing new. So I don't really see the whole fame and fortune angle either. So if it's not the Jason angle, and it's not the fame and fortune angle, what's Dr. Cruz's true motive? Did he really think that he could control Tina? To brainwash her? Was he after power? What was he going to use that power for? World domination? As much as I like Cruise, not really the character, but the evil motive and him as the villain in the movie, as the second villain in the movie, I just don't see the motive. So what do you think, chat? What do you think Dr. Cruise's true motive was? Because honestly, I don't see one. And 10. Did any of the events in this film actually happen?
You know, with my luck, you're probably gonna turn out to be another delusion.
Now what if she's right? Now I will admit this is kind of a reach, but it's still a very interesting theory that I have. So we know we see some of Tina's visions in the movie, a lot of which doesn't really make sense to the viewer. How she can see the present, the past, the future. And if we're seeing the movie through her eyes, then we should know Tina is not a reliable narrator. What if what we're seeing is actually a fractured version of her mind's reality? Hear me out on this. So aside from the plot holes of the film, trying to make sense of the timeline, let's talk about the film's universe's real life inconsistencies that we see throughout the film. Perhaps what we're seeing isn't the events unfolding, but the actual part of Tina's fractured imagination. Let me show you some of the things I'm talking about. Again, if we're not breaking the fourth wall of the film, I know I say that a lot, but over half the people in the comments just blame it on lazy filmmaking. That's not the point of the series. Anyway, let's get started. Let's talk about the stakes. So Jason's first weapon of choice is a stake. Now this does play an integral part of the film where we know Dr. Cruise is kind of fucking with Tina. He uses it on the victim right here. It's then staked into the wall, then it disappears.
But it was here. It was right here.
But then we see that it was Dr. Cruise who's been hiding it all along. So did that stake even exist? How the hell does it make sense that Jason used this spike on the victim, stuck it inside the Shepherd residence, Dr. Cruise pulled it out, hid it inside his desk drawer, but then he finds it out in the woods on the ground with the dead bodies, and the mom also finds it, and Tina finds it. There's no way this makes any fucking sense. That's not including every time you see it in Tina's hallucinations. You know why? Because it's not real.
It wasn't a hallucination.
Yes, it was.
So let's talk about when Tina first meets the group at the birthday party. You see this ball right here, how it changes? If we're not blaming this on a simple filming mistake, what if these little inconsistencies is because it's all part of Tina's interpretation? The events that are happening are not actually happening. Now, a lot of these are also blinking you miss it moments. Let's talk about the amount of luggage Dr. Cruise and the mom brings in when they first arrive at the residence. You see that? Where did that bag come from? Makes you wonder. And God forbid, let's talk about this recycled shot from the final chapter. I'll do my best to show this side by side, but if I can't, I'll show you one after the other. So what if Tina did accidentally kill John, which I'm sure she did, I'm not denying that fact, but she learned about the legend of Jason Voorhees and Camp Crystal Lake, and she's working that into her own narrative. Another example, let's talk about this VHS cover. As you can see, when the mom gets caught by Cruz, it's open, but as soon as Cruz walks in, it's closed. Even the plaques on the wall. You see how they subtly change distances? Coincidence? And what about Tina's pants changing the khakis to blue jeans over and over and over? It's almost like things are changing in real time because they're not real. Another example is Maddie looking for her earring. She stops by this big ass tree as she's bent down looking for it. And the next shot, the tree is nowhere to be found. It just disappears. And the list goes on and on and on and on. I legit have almost 40 examples here. But for the sake of time, I'll call it here. And let's throw up the big one. We've talked about John, her dad, saving the day. I've already established that I believe John was never there, that it was all part of her psyche. But I do believe that that theory also bleeds into this theory, that none of this was ever real. What if all these many inconsistencies are happening in real time because it's not reality? It's Tina's interpretation of what might be. She defeats the mighty legend of Jason Voorhees, and to self-soothe herself in her own narrative, she brings back her father to save the day. Now I know this is a long shot, but if we never leave the walls of the film, this actually makes a lot of sense. Again, there's about 30 more examples I can throw in there. I might one day make this its own video in itself, but we'll see where that goes, if I remember. If you guys want it, leave it down in the comments. I'll make a note.
I saw my father get killed when I was a kid. It really messed up my head a lot.
This really is a too good to be true paint by numbers hero story. Think about it. She's responsible for her father's death. She tries to find a way to better her own narrative, using her mother to go back to the place where it all started. The doctor, which she doesn't like, becomes the villain of her narrative. She knows about Jason and the camp's lore, and she uses that to kill off Cruz, the doctor in which is keeping her from freedom. She literally becomes her own superhero. And when Jason, aka the big bad wolf, comes in, when the stakes are high, in the grand finale of the battle, she brings back her father as part of the narrative. You even throw Nick, the love interest, in there. and they ride off into the sunset for her happily ever after.